I never imagined I'd wake up one morning feeling like a stranger in the life I'd spent years carefully building. I never imagined I'd wake up one morning feeling like a stranger in the life I'd spent years carefully building. The early morning light filtered through the thin curtains, casting soft shadows across our bedroom walls. James lay beside me, breathing quietly, oblivious to the unease gnawing steadily at my heart. Despite our picturesque life, two beautiful children, a comfortable home, successful careers, I felt a loneliness so profound it startled me. Turning slowly, I studied James's peaceful expression, an odd ache filling my chest. I vividly remembered our early years, full of laughter and dreams whispered under moonlit skies. I remembered the warmth of his hand gently wrapped around mine, promises shared in quiet moments, each whisper binding us closer. Those memories now felt distant, almost unreal, buried beneath the weight of everyday life and quiet disappointments. Reaching out instinctively, I paused, my fingers hovering just above his shoulder. When had the space between us become so vast? I desperately wished to bridge that distance, to reconnect, but uncertainty held me back, paralyzed by fear of rejection. Pulling my hand back, I quietly rose from bed, my bare feet touching the cool wooden floor as the world outside began waking gently around me. I walked slowly to the window, pulling the curtains aside slightly to reveal the calm neighborhood waking up. The gentle hum of a distant lawnmower mixed with the faint laughter of early rising children brought me no comfort today. Instead, a deep sense of isolation gripped me, tightening its hold. I closed my eyes, leaning against the cool glass, recalling the first day we moved into this home, excited, hopeful, believing wholeheartedly that we had achieved the life we always wanted. But now, I couldn't shake the persistent feeling that somewhere along the way, we had lost sight of each other. Downstairs, I heard Ava and Oliver stirring, their innocent voices gently breaking the oppressive silence that filled the house. My children, my anchors in this increasingly unfamiliar reality. Taking a deep breath, I straightened my shoulders, pushing away the heaviness for another day. But the unease remained, a shadow hovering just behind me, impossible to ignore. Sunday afternoons had become quiet performances of subtle criticism and mounting pressure, delivered politely but firmly by James's parents. Each family dinner was now something I silently dreaded. "Emma, dear, you've been looking quite worn down lately," Helen remarked softly, her smile carefully masking the sharpness behind her eyes. "It's just work," I replied calmly, my own smile tight, betraying none of the exhaustion I truly felt. "Perhaps you should reconsider your workload," she continued smoothly. "After all, your family needs you more than your office does." I felt heat rise to my cheeks but swallowed back any retort, forcing composure into my voice. "I manage both well enough." James finally glanced up from his phone, clearly sensing tension but choosing silence as usual. His eyes briefly met mine, but the brief moment of connection vanished quickly as he returned to his screen, indifferent or intentionally oblivious to the turmoil building inside me. "James," Helen turned her attention to her son, her voice gently reproachful. "Shouldn't you encourage Emma to take better care of herself? She's obviously exhausted." James hesitated momentarily, glancing toward me with mild discomfort. "Emma knows what's best for herself, Mom." "But do you, Emma?" Helen pressed gently, eyes fixed intently on me. The question hung heavily in the air, sharp and accusatory beneath the polite tone. A wave of frustration surged inside me, mingled with hurt. How had I become the subject of scrutiny in my own home, with James passively observing rather than supporting me? After dinner, alone in the kitchen, I washed dishes forcefully, scrubbing away invisible stains as tears of frustration blurred my vision. James entered quietly behind me, hesitating before finally speaking. "Emma, don't let my mother get under your skin. You know how she can be," he murmured awkwardly. Turning abruptly, I faced him directly, my eyes burning fiercely. "It's not just her, James. It's the fact that you never stand up for me. You let her question my decisions, my worth, and you say nothing." He opened his mouth, searching for words, but nothing came out. His silence said everything. My shoulders sagged with defeat as I turned back to the sink, hands trembling slightly beneath the running water. "Emma," he finally began, his voice barely audible. "I'm sorry," but his apology felt hollow, insufficient against the backdrop of countless disappointments and unresolved tensions. As he quietly left the kitchen, I stood alone, a sob catching painfully in my throat, realizing how alone I had truly become in the heart of my own family. Sleep eluded me that night, anxiety twisting inside me as thoughts raced relentlessly. Beside me, James slept soundly, unaware of the turmoil consuming me. A sudden vibration disrupted my spiraling thoughts. James's phone, illuminated briefly in the darkened room. My heart tightened, curiosity and fear surged simultaneously. Glancing cautiously at James, I reached carefully for his phone, the faint glow illuminating my trembling hands. A string of notifications flashed urgently on the screen. Each message came from the same unfamiliar name, Maya. My pulse quickened as I read the messages. Thanks for tonight, James. Your support means everything. Can we meet again soon? I don't think I can manage without you. Each word sank deeper into my chest. Confusion and fear entwined tightly within me. Who was Maya? Why was she reaching out to James with such intimacy? I carefully returned the phone, heart racing. The room suddenly felt suffocating. Doubts I'd ignored for months surfaced painfully clear, and I knew there was no turning back. My mind raced, formulating a plan. Tomorrow I'd follow James. I had to know the truth, no matter how painful it might prove to be. As dawn approached, exhaustion finally overcame me, yet sleep offered little comfort, haunted by unanswered questions and looming uncertainty. The next evening, as James prepared to leave, claiming yet another late night at work, I nodded silently, masking the growing turmoil within me. Moments after he closed the door, I quickly grabbed my jacket and keys, heart pounding fiercely in my chest. Slipping quietly into my car, I followed him, heart thundering in my ears as unfamiliar streets blurred past in the fading light. James finally stopped at a quiet cafe tucked away from the bustling city streets. I parked discreetly, watching breathlessly as he entered, greeting a woman waiting anxiously inside. Through the cafe's window, I watched helplessly, heart sinking painfully as James reached out, taking her hands gently in his own. The tenderness in his expression, something I hadn't seen from him in months, pierced through my chest like a sharp blade. My fingers trembled violently as I raised my phone, capturing photos of their interaction, each click deepening the ache inside me. Tears burned behind my eyes, anger and hurt battling fiercely within my chest. Yet curiosity compelled me to stay, to witness whatever painful truth was unfolding before me. Minutes felt like hours as they conversed, emotions openly visible on their faces. Finally, unable to bear more, I turned away, breathing unevenly, gripping the steering wheel as my world tilted dangerously beneath me. Questions raced wildly through my mind. Who was Maya? How deeply had James betrayed me? Driving home slowly through the darkness, city lights blurred by tears, a painful clarity settled within me. My marriage stood at a terrifying crossroads. Every instinct urged me to confront James immediately, yet something held me back. Perhaps it was fear of hearing truths I wasn't prepared for, or simply dread of shattering what remained of my carefully constructed life. As I pulled into our driveway, darkness wrapped around me, silent and heavy. I sat still, feeling utterly alone in the silence. Taking a deep breath, I stepped inside quietly. The familiar comfort of our home now felt foreign, distant. Climbing the stairs slowly, exhaustion clung heavily to each step. Standing at the threshold of our bedroom, watching James sleeping peacefully, an overwhelming resolve strengthened within me. Tomorrow, everything would change. I would no longer ignore the painful truths I'd buried deep within. I owed it to myself to seek clarity, even if it meant tearing apart the world I had once so desperately wanted to preserve. Rain pattered gently against my windshield, creating small rivulets of water that blurred the neon sign of the cafe across the street. The Blue Willow Cafe. I'd never noticed this place before, tucked away in a quiet, unfamiliar part of town, hidden beneath tangled trees and dim streetlights. My heart hammered relentlessly as I sat in my parked car, fingers gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Every shallow breath seemed heavier than the last. I'd told myself countless times this was ridiculous. James had always been loyal, hadn't he? Yet here I was, consumed by suspicion, silently following the man I'd loved for years. Moments passed in agonizing slowness before I saw him. James appeared from the shadows, pausing briefly outside the cafe's entrance, glancing around nervously. I instinctively sank lower into my seat, heart beating wildly. The person I loved, the man I'd trusted implicitly for nearly a decade, was standing right there, in secret, looking over his shoulder as though terrified someone might recognize him. Then I saw her. She sat at a secluded table, visibly shaken, her delicate frame tense, pale fingers nervously tapping the porcelain cup in front of her. She lifted her gaze when James approached, and something flashed across her face: relief, hope, vulnerability. James sat quickly, his posture protective, leaning closer to her as she whispered urgently. My chest ached painfully. Tears stung my eyes, blurring their figures into vague silhouettes beneath the soft cafe lights. But I couldn't look away. I had to know. Hands shaking, I reached for my phone, snapping blurry photos through the windshield, an act that felt both necessary and humiliating. The images showed little detail, but the painful clarity in my mind was sharp enough. As minutes passed, their conversation grew more intense. James reached across the table, gently covering the woman's trembling hand with his. The tenderness of that gesture felt like a slap across my face, robbing me of breath. He hadn't looked at me with that kind of concern in months. A dozen thoughts flooded my mind: anger, betrayal, jealousy, but one thought struck me hardest. Was this why James had grown distant? Had he truly betrayed me? I forced myself to breathe deeply, trying desperately to calm the tidal wave of emotion swelling within me. Closing my eyes, I leaned back against the seat, willing away the tears that threatened to break free. This couldn't be happening. Not to us. Not after all we'd been through together. Memories surged to the surface. Our wedding day, James nervously fumbling with his vows, his hands shaking as he slid the ring onto my finger. Nights spent laughing on our worn-out couch, whispering plans about the future, dreams of raising a family together, building a life rooted in trust and honesty. Had I been naive? Or had something changed along the way? I glanced back at the cafe, heart heavy with indecision. They were finishing their conversation, James gently placing his hand on her shoulder in comfort. It felt intimate, painful, and deeply personal. Each passing second felt like a slow knife twisting deeper into my chest. Minutes later, James walked out, quickly disappearing around the corner toward his parked car. The woman remained, alone, her head bowed in quiet despair. I stared at her from my car, fighting an internal battle. I could confront her right now, demand answers, clarity, closure. But something held me back. Fear. Fear of the truth, fear of knowing, fear of losing the fragile stability I had clung to for years. Instead, I waited silently, letting the minutes pass as the rain fell harder against my windshield, washing away clarity with every droplet. I felt paralyzed by indecision, until finally she stood up, slipped on a faded jacket, and stepped outside. Her face, illuminated now under the street lamp, revealed exhaustion, sadness, vulnerability. And then, inexplicably, she glanced directly toward me, eyes widening in recognition, or fear. I gasped, ducking down instinctively, adrenaline surging painfully through me. Had she seen me? Did she know who I was? I waited, heart racing, counting the seconds until finally gathering enough courage to peek cautiously once more. She was gone, leaving nothing behind but an empty chair and unanswered questions. As I drove home through darkened streets, my mind raced endlessly, haunted by the woman's frightened eyes and James's hesitant, worried glance. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, jaw clenched. The familiar streets felt foreign, each corner a sharp reminder of the new uncertainty creeping into my life. Once home, I parked quietly, sitting in the darkened driveway, unable to move. My breath felt heavy, each inhale painful, each exhale shaky. I reached into my pocket, pulling out the phone, staring blankly at the blurry photos I'd taken. Proof of betrayal or misunderstanding? Clarity or more confusion? Inside the house, lights glowed warmly, promising a comfort that felt unbearably distant now. Taking a deep breath, I wiped my tears roughly, stepped out, and walked slowly toward the front door, my feet heavy, dread dragging at my heart. Just as my fingers touched the doorknob, my phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me sharply. I froze, breath hitching in my throat as I read the unfamiliar number flashing across my screen. Trembling, I opened the message. "Emma, I know you saw me tonight. We need to talk. There's something urgent you need to know. About James and about your family." I stared at the words, heart racing painfully. How did she get my number? What did she mean, about your family? I glanced fearfully back toward the dark street, paranoia creeping up my spine. My safe, predictable world was shattering rapidly, piece by painful piece. Taking a deep breath, I steadied my shaking hands and typed my reply. "Who are you, and how do you know me?" The answer arrived immediately, simple yet devastating. My name is Maya. I've waited years to finally meet you. I'm your sister. My phone slipped from my numb fingers, crashing softly onto the doorstep, screen illuminating my stunned face, revealing tears I hadn't realized were falling. This was far worse than anything I'd imagined. James hadn't just hidden someone from me, he had uncovered a secret I'd never been meant to know. My knees felt weak as reality crashed violently around me. Everything I'd known, believed, and trusted now lay scattered, leaving me standing in a darkness more profound than the night itself. My fingers shook as I read Maya's message again, the words blazing on the screen, simple yet brutally devastating. Emma, I'm your sister. The world spun around me. I steadied myself against the doorway, heart racing uncontrollably. My mind flashed through memories, searching desperately for something, anything, that would confirm or deny this impossible truth. Growing up an only child, I'd always longed for siblings, a companion to share secrets with, someone to lean on. But not like this, not hidden in shadows, wrapped in secrecy. The phone buzzed again, snapping me out of my daze. Another message from Maya appeared immediately. I understand this is overwhelming. I didn't want you to find out this way. James wanted to tell you gently, but things got complicated. I'm so sorry. My chest tightened painfully. Hands trembling, I typed back rapidly. Meet me, now. Her response was swift, straightforward. At the Blue Willow Cafe. I'm already here. I drove recklessly through the night, tires splashing through puddles illuminated under streetlights. Anger surged alongside fear. Secrets felt sharp, stabbing at my chest. Pulling into the parking lot, I rushed through the rain, feet splashing through shallow puddles, barely noticing the chill seeping through my thin jacket. Entering the cafe, my eyes quickly found Maya. She sat in the same corner, twisting a coffee cup nervously between her hands. She raised her eyes to meet mine, sadness and guilt shadowing her face. I stood frozen for a moment, breathing heavily, my pulse loud in my ears. Emma, she whispered hesitantly, her voice gentle, vulnerable. Thank you for coming. I slid into the seat opposite her without responding, watching closely as she anxiously twisted a small napkin between trembling fingers. She seemed younger up close, her eyes dark and haunted by pain. I know it's hard to believe, she started softly, eyes glistening, carefully holding back tears. But it's true. My mother and our father had an affair nearly 30 years ago. He disappeared from my life entirely before I was even born. I swallowed, bitterness rising like bile. Why now? My voice trembled, angry tears gathering. Why reach out to James, not directly to me? I didn't know you were my sister at first, she explained quietly, her gaze pleading. I met James through a friend at work. He was kind, trustworthy, exactly what I needed. Later, when I realized who he was married to, it felt too complicated, too painful to face you directly. I hesitated too long, and things spiraled. Her words echoed in my head, each revelation striking painfully. James knew and didn't tell me? She nodded softly. He thought he was protecting you, waiting for the right moment. He begged me not to tell you yet, said it would crush you. I laughed bitterly, the sound foreign, harsh. And look how well that turned out. Maya's hands shook slightly as she clutched her coffee cup tighter. A fading bruise, purple beneath thick makeup, suddenly drew my attention, faintly visible along her jawline. What happened to you? I asked suddenly, instinctively reaching out before pulling my hand back. My anger softened slightly, replaced by concern. She looked away, shame evident in her posture. My husband. He has issues. Anger. Control. James was just trying to help. He advised me legally. He gave me resources, contacts. Her eyes filled with tears. I swear nothing romantic happened. I'm so sorry you misunderstood. I never meant to hurt you. I stared into my untouched coffee cup, fighting conflicting emotions, betrayal, confusion, compassion. My carefully constructed anger had fractured, replaced by empathy, sadness, and confusion. James's secrecy hurt, but so did Maya's suffering, her pain reflecting my own hidden wounds. Does my father know you exist? I finally asked, the question painfully raw. She shook her head slowly, looking down. I don't think so, but your mother... She does. I jerked upright in shock. My mother? She confronted mine years ago, made it clear to leave your family alone. My mother obeyed, but... Maya's voice faltered, breaking with emotion. I always wanted to know you, but I couldn't. Not until James found out. I sat back heavily, numbness spreading through me. The depth of deception, of betrayal from every direction was suffocating. My mother, so composed, so morally upright, was part of this elaborate lie. My family, my marriage, everything I believed true suddenly felt like shifting sands beneath my feet. I'm sorry, Emma, Maya whispered softly again, reaching out hesitantly, her fingers brushing mine gently. I never wanted this to destroy your life. Her touch was brief, hesitant, yet it ignited something within me. Recognition, perhaps. We shared blood, pain, deception. Pain. I looked at her clearly for the first time, saw myself reflected in her tired eyes, her guarded vulnerability. We've both been lied to, I said quietly, accepting the painful bond between us. But what happens now? She shook her head, tears finally spilling silently down her cheeks. I don't know. I was hoping you could help me figure it out. I took a slow, steady breath, my gaze drifting out toward the rain-streaked window. Outside, the darkness was beginning to fade, faintly lit by the first signs of dawn. I had no answers yet, only more questions, but strangely, sitting with Maya, facing the truth, no matter how devastating, felt right. It felt like a beginning. Finally, I turned back to Maya, heart still aching but no longer frozen. We can't change the past, but from now on, no more lies. She nodded solemnly, relief softening her expression, tentative hope appearing. No more lies. I squeezed her hand briefly, a fragile gesture bridging years of secrets. Yet even in that quiet moment, I felt the weight of another battle looming, confronting my family, James, and all the truths they'd hidden beneath carefully maintained appearances. My phone buzzed suddenly again, shattering the fragile peace we'd found. My mother's name flashed urgently on screen. My stomach twisted sharply, dread filling me instantly. She never called this early. With trembling fingers, I answered cautiously, my voice barely a whisper. Hello? Emma? She said sharply, her voice tight, strained with anxiety. We need to talk, right now. The line clicked, leaving me staring blankly ahead. Maya watched me silently, concern shadowing her face. It's my mother, I explained numbly, heart sinking deeper. She knows I found you. Fear flickered across Maya's face again, mirroring my own. The quiet moment we'd shared evaporated instantly beneath the weight of what was coming. Emma, Maya whispered softly, gripping my hand tighter, desperation edging into her voice. Please, don't leave me now. I squeezed her hand in reassurance, mustering a strength I didn't fully feel yet. I won't. Outside, the rain intensified, pounding harder against the glass, echoing the storm growing within me. We were bound together now, sisters forged by secrets, pain, and a desperate need for truth. And together, we would face whatever awaited next, even if it tore apart everything we once believed true. The rain fell steadily, drenching the city in muted shades of gray as I pulled up to my parents' home. It had always been my sanctuary, a place of warmth and familiarity, but today it felt strangely foreboding, each raindrop echoing the dread pooling within me. Maya sat quietly beside me, visibly tense, her pale fingers clutching the seatbelt. Are you sure you're ready for this? I asked softly, turning to face her. She met my gaze, the deep sadness in her eyes mirroring my own. I have to be, she whispered resolutely. We both do. We walked slowly up the familiar path, our footsteps muted by the damp ground. The door opened before we even reached it, my mother's silhouette framed by the soft glow of the hallway. Her eyes widened in shock and alarm as she noticed Maya at my side. Emma? What is she doing here? My mother's voice shook, a brittle facade of calm cracking immediately. We need answers, Mom, I replied, stepping forward firmly, my voice trembling slightly despite my attempt to remain composed. Why didn't you ever tell me? She hesitated, looking anxiously between Maya and me. Come inside, she finally whispered. Your father should hear this too. We entered the living room, tension immediately enveloping us, thick as fog. My father rose slowly from his chair, confusion etched clearly into his tired features. His gaze lingered briefly on Maya, recognition dawning slowly, painfully. Who? He began, but his voice faltered under the weight of truth he'd clearly buried for decades. This is Maya, I interrupted softly but firmly. My sister, apparently. Your daughter. He paled, visibly shaken, dropping back heavily into the chair. My mother stood rigidly beside him, her eyes flickering anxiously between us all, her carefully crafted composure unraveling quickly. Emma, you don't understand, my mother began desperately, her voice trembling, pleading. It was years ago. Then help me understand, I shouted suddenly, years of hidden resentment bursting forth, tears blurring my vision. All my life you've preached honesty, integrity. How could you hide something like this from me, from both of us? My father buried his face in his hands, shaking silently. My mother's voice cracked painfully. We were protecting you, protecting this family. It was a mistake. A mistake? Maya's voice came out strained, trembling with suppressed pain. That mistake was my life. Silence filled the room, heavy, suffocating. My father finally looked up, eyes red-rimmed and weary. I was selfish, weak. I regretted it immediately. But your mother gave me an ultimatum, to never speak of it again. Even if it meant abandoning your own child? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, heart aching for the sister I'd unknowingly lost, and now found. His gaze dropped in shameful silence, answering louder than words. Maya stepped forward slowly, trembling visibly. I don't expect your forgiveness, she said softly, voice shaking with hurt, yet infused with quiet dignity. But I deserve to know who I was, where I belonged. My mother stared at the floor, shoulders shaking quietly. I was afraid, Emma, she admitted finally, voice breaking with guilt. Afraid you would hate us, that you'd never forgive, that our family would be destroyed. My anger softened slightly into sadness, seeing her vulnerability, her humanness. But look at us now, Mom. The lies didn't protect us, they just delayed the inevitable. I reached instinctively for Maya's hand, squeezing it gently. She looked at me, surprised, grateful, tears silently streaming down her face. We both lost so much because of these lies, I whispered. I grew up lonely, and she grew up abandoned. Is that the kind of family you wanted? My parents stood silently, grief and shame clear in their slumped postures. The silence stretched painfully until Maya stepped forward hesitantly. I don't want to destroy anyone, she spoke softly, courage evident despite her vulnerability. I just wanted truth, closure, and maybe a family. My mother looked up, eyes finally meeting Maya's with genuine remorse. I was wrong, terribly wrong. Both of you deserved so much better from us. Rain tapped gently against the windows, breaking the silence with its quiet rhythm. I felt an overwhelming exhaustion settle over me, the weight of a lifetime's lies pressing down all at once. Yet in the silence following this painful confrontation, something new stirred within me, compassion. Compassion not only for Maya, but even in a fragile way for my parents. We can't undo what happened, I said finally, voice steady but gentle. But we can face it honestly now. No more secrets, no more pretending. From this moment, we're choosing truth, even if it hurts. My father nodded slowly, shoulders heavy with regret. My mother stepped closer, tears streaming down her face, reaching hesitantly toward Maya. I'm sorry, she whispered brokenly, her voice catching. I was so wrong. Can you ever forgive me? Maya hesitated, visibly torn between pain and the tentative hope offered by our mother's sincere remorse. Finally, she nodded silently, gently taking my mother's hand, a small, cautious gesture of reconciliation. Outside, the storm slowly quieted, as though nature itself mirrored our fragile peace. And as I watched my fractured family tentatively attempt to repair decades of damage, I understood clearly for the first time. Healing wouldn't come quickly, nor would forgiveness be easy. But at least the truth, raw, painful, liberating, was finally out in the open, offering a chance to rebuild on something stronger, something real. As we stood quietly in the softened light, the illusion of the perfect family had been shattered. But perhaps in its place, something far more valuable could now emerge, a genuine bond rooted not in silence, but in honesty and courage. Yet even as I clung to that small hope, a quiet whisper echoed within me, one final question, one final truth I had yet to confront. If James had uncovered all this before I did, how much more was he hiding? I stepped outside into the heavy, oppressive air, feeling the weight of every revelation pressing relentlessly against my chest. Rain continued to fall in sheets, turning the pavement into a murky mirror reflecting dim streetlights and my own turbulent thoughts. Beside me, Maya stood silently, exhausted, but somehow lighter now that the secrets she'd carried for a lifetime were finally laid bare. We didn't speak during the drive back to my house. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was reflective, healing even. Yet beneath that fragile peace, my mind churned relentlessly, replaying every word spoken by my parents, every hurtful secret revealed. As we pulled into my driveway, I noticed my phone glowing urgently on the seat beside me, the screen flashing insistently. My pulse quickened with unease as I picked it up and read the screen. 5 missed calls from Oliver's school. A sudden, sharp wave of panic seized me, squeezing my chest painfully. My hands shook as I quickly dialed back, dread pulsing louder with each ring. "Emma, is that you?" came the tense, anxious voice of Mrs. Thompson, the school counselor. "Yes!" "I'm here. What happened?" My voice was tight, desperate. Maya reached over, placing a gentle hand on my arm in silent comfort. Oliver had a serious fall during recess. He hit his head and lost consciousness briefly. Paramedics just took him to county hospital. The air vanished from my lungs. "Is he okay?" "He regained consciousness, but the doctors need to run tests immediately. Please hurry." I ended the call, heart pounding uncontrollably. My vision blurred momentarily, my breath shallow, uneven. Maya's face mirrored my panic, eyes wide with concern. "Oliver's hurt. I need to get to the hospital now," I stammered, fighting dizziness. "I'll drive," Maya insisted firmly, her voice strong despite her visible distress. "You're in no state to do this alone." Minutes later, we sped toward the hospital, tires splashing through pools of rainwater, headlights cutting through the stormy twilight. My phone shook violently in my hand as I dialed James repeatedly, each unanswered call amplifying my panic and frustration. "Pick up, James," I whispered fiercely, tears stinging my eyes. "Please, just this once. Be here for us." The phone rang endlessly, eventually clicking over to voicemail, James's calm, familiar voice grating against my nerves. "This is James. Leave a message." I hung up angrily, gripping the phone tighter, feeling utterly abandoned in the moment I needed him most. The betrayal of his absence felt sharper than ever, a fresh wound slicing into the chaos already swirling inside me. At the hospital, lights blurred around me as Maya guided me through hallways, her hand steady on my shoulder. My mind raced, flooded by terrifying scenarios and helpless guilt. Had I missed something important with Oliver while consumed by my own turmoil? When I finally reached the emergency room, I saw him, my beautiful boy, pale and frightened, lying on the hospital bed. Oliver's small frame seemed heartbreakingly vulnerable beneath the sterile hospital lights. He turned his head slowly, eyes filling instantly with tears as he saw me. "Mom," he whispered softly, his voice cracking. "It hurts." I rushed to his bedside, clutching his small hand tightly, blinking back tears as I forced a reassuring smile. "Mommy's here, sweetheart. You're gonna be okay." His hand trembled slightly in mine, and the sight nearly shattered my composure entirely. "Where's Dad?" Oliver asked weakly, eyes scanning the room hopefully. "He's coming soon, honey," I lied instinctively, feeling bitterness rise like acid. Where was James? Was he with Paul, drinking away our family's problems, or simply ignoring his phone again? The doctor approached carefully, his expression cautious. "Oliver sustained a concussion. We need to observe him closely overnight, but he should make a full recovery." Relief flooded me, powerful enough to weaken my knees. Maya steadied me discreetly, offering strength I desperately needed. But the temporary relief quickly shifted back to anger and grief. James should be here. Oliver needed his father, and James was nowhere to be found. My resentment burned fiercely, each passing second of his absence fueling the flame. The night stretched endlessly, filled with beeping monitors, quiet conversations with nurses, and Oliver drifting fitfully in and out of sleep. I paced nervously, checking my phone repeatedly. Still no word from James. Finally, just past midnight, he stumbled into the hospital room, disheveled, eyes glassy and red. The faint scent of alcohol trailed behind him, igniting fresh fury within me. "Where have you been?" I hissed sharply, stepping between him and Oliver's bed, shielding my son instinctively. I got your messages late," James mumbled vaguely, eyes avoiding mine, clearly ashamed. "Late?" My voice trembled, incredulous anger erupting dangerously. "Our son was hurt, James. I called you for hours, and you chose tonight of all nights to disappear?" James's eyes flickered toward Maya, his face registering shock, embarrassment, and irritation simultaneously. "Why is she here?" he asked defensively. Because she cared enough to be here when we needed someone, I spat back bitterly. She was there when you weren't. His face hardened defensively, shoulders tensing. Emma, not now. When, then? My voice broke painfully, raw with pent-up emotion. When will you ever face the consequences of your actions? When will you show up for us? Oliver asked for you tonight. You failed him. You failed me. James stood silently, unable to form words in response. For the first time, I saw clearly what our marriage had become. A fractured partnership built on silence, betrayal, and disappointment. Oliver stirred weakly, his small voice interrupting softly. Mom? Dad? We turned quickly toward him, guilt silencing us momentarily. Oliver's weary eyes searched mine, confusion and worry clear in his innocent gaze. My heart broke instantly. I stepped closer, gently brushing Oliver's hair back, forcing calm into my voice. Everything's okay, sweetheart. Mommy's right here. James watched silently, the distance between us painfully evident, the gap widening beyond repair. As the nurse approached quietly, signaling visiting hours were ending, I felt my anger cool into a sharp, resolute clarity. I took James's arm firmly, guiding him away from Oliver's bed, whispering fiercely, This is it, James. I can't do this anymore. Oliver deserves better. I deserve better. James's eyes widened, shock and hurt mingling briefly before resignation settled across his face. He nodded slowly, a deep sadness replacing his earlier defensiveness. You're right, he whispered, voice heavy with remorse. I've let you both down. Silence stretched between us, the truth heavy yet oddly liberating. Outside, the first glimmers of dawn broke through the rain clouds, softly illuminating our fractured family, marking the end of something we both once cherished deeply. As James turned away quietly, retreating down the sterile hospital hallway, I felt an overwhelming sense of grief and relief intertwined. Oliver reached out weakly, taking my hand gently. Mommy, please don't cry, he whispered softly. I squeezed his small hand, smiling gently through tears. I'm okay, baby. Mommy's just tired. He nodded slowly, eyelids fluttering shut, comforted by my presence. I stood protectively beside him, vowing silently, fiercely, no more compromise, no more pretending. From tonight onward, we would face the future bravely, honestly, no matter how painful it might be. Outside, the rain finally stopped, leaving behind only the quiet, clear promise of dawn. In that fragile stillness, I realized the truth I'd been running from had finally set me free. The days following Oliver's accident stretched into a blur of restless nights, hurried mornings, and quiet reflections. Moving boxes slowly accumulated in the corner of our once shared bedroom, each packed item another silent farewell to the life I'd desperately tried to hold together. But within the heaviness, something new stirred within me, a strength I'd forgotten existed. I rented a modest apartment across town, a cozy, sunlit place overlooking a small park. The morning we moved, Ava held my hand, her eyes wide with curiosity, uncertain about our new life. Oliver, still bandaged but recovering quickly, leaned against my side, quiet but resolute. Maya had offered to help unpack, her quiet presence a surprising comfort amid the chaos. Together we arranged furniture, hung pictures, and created order out of confusion. Our evenings became a gentle ritual, cups of tea, quiet conversations on the balcony beneath fading sunsets, and whispered reassurances that life, despite its upheaval, could offer something new, perhaps even something better. Through Maya, I discovered parts of myself I'd long neglected. We shared stories late into the night, slowly discovering how our parallel loneliness had shaped us into women who learned to endure in silence. I started attending therapy sessions regularly. At first, each conversation felt like peeling layers of my heart, painful, raw, necessary. Gradually, however, clarity emerged. The carefully constructed persona of the perfect wife, the perfect daughter, began to crumble, revealing a woman underneath who'd forgotten her own worth. With each passing session, the tightness in my chest eased. Breathing felt less like survival and more like freedom. One afternoon, sitting in the sunlit therapist's office, I finally articulated a truth I'd long buried beneath years of silence. I've spent my entire life defining my worth by how useful I was to others, I admitted softly, tears pricking my eyes. But when did I lose myself in the process? My therapist nodded gently. Recognition is the first step. You're finally reclaiming your life. I took those words home with me, carrying them as I began journaling each night. Writing became therapeutic, a place to untangle emotions that had knotted inside me for years. With each sentence, each page, my strength slowly returned. I began walking with confidence again, shoulders lighter, steps steadier. My reflection gradually became less a stranger, more the woman I aspired to be. Maya and I grew closer each passing day, our bond strengthening as wounds healed. She decided to leave her abusive marriage, inspired by my newfound resolve. Witnessing her courage ignited my own, reminding me that strength was contagious. James contacted me sporadically, always respectful, always tentative, careful never to overstep boundaries I'd set firmly. Our conversations were brief, practical, tinged with sadness but also mutual understanding. Something had irreparably shifted between us, but perhaps, in losing our marriage, we'd both found an opportunity to truly heal. One quiet afternoon, Maya and I sat on the balcony of my new apartment, sipping tea, sunlight warming our faces. She glanced over at me, her eyes clearer than ever. "Do you think we'll ever be truly free from what happened?" she asked softly. I smiled gently, watching the wind rustle through leaves, peaceful in its simplicity. "Maybe never completely. But that doesn't mean we can't move forward. Our past shapes us, but it doesn't have to define us anymore." She smiled in return, understanding passing silently between us. That night, as I tucked Oliver and Ava into bed, their soft breathing filling the quiet room, I felt a gentle calm I'd almost forgotten. For the first time, the silence didn't frighten me. Instead, it held a sense of possibility, of healing, of a life built firmly on my own terms. As I turned off the lights, my phone softly buzzed. A simple text from James appeared on the screen, sincere, raw. "I'm so sorry, Emma. You deserve happiness, wherever it leads you." I stared at the message, chest aching slightly, but this time it felt different. This was closure. Genuine, heartfelt, final. I replied calmly, confidently, "Thank you, James. I wish you peace too." Putting the phone down, a quiet strength settled in my chest. I'd faced the truth, confronted the deepest betrayals, and was emerging stronger, clearer. Tomorrow no longer frightened me. Instead, it beckoned gently, offering a fresh chance to build the life I'd always deserved. And this time, I was ready. 3 months later, I stood alone on the wooden deck of a small lakeside cabin, breathing deeply as the cool morning mist curled gently around me. Sunlight danced across the lake's calm surface, golden ribbons shimmering through the haze, warming my skin. I closed my eyes briefly, allowing myself to fully savor this quiet, peaceful moment, a feeling of serenity I hadn't experienced in years. This trip was initially meant to be my honeymoon, a celebration of love and partnership. Yet here I was, alone, and somehow it felt exactly right. For the first time, solitude felt empowering rather than frightening, a choice instead of a consequence. My days at the cabin had become simple, yet profoundly meaningful. I spent quiet hours reading by the lake, exploring trails beneath towering pines, and journaling my thoughts each evening by the warmth of the fireplace. Every word I wrote seemed to bring clarity, strength, and a deeper understanding of myself, my desires, my boundaries, my worth. One afternoon, as I walked slowly along the lake shore, I paused to watch a young family playing nearby. The laughter of their children echoed softly through the trees, a beautiful, uncomplicated happiness that tugged gently at my heart. Instead of sadness or regret, I felt gratitude. Grateful not for the loss I'd experienced, but for the lessons it taught me, the wisdom that came from pain, from heartbreak, from finally learning to love myself enough to let go. Later that evening, my phone rang unexpectedly. I glanced down, surprised to see James's name glowing softly on the screen. For a moment, hesitation lingered, old habits urging me to avoid the discomfort. But I answered calmly, determined to face whatever awaited on the other end. "Emma," his voice came through softly, respectful, yet still carrying a hint of his familiar warmth. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." I smiled softly, gazing out at the calm lake reflecting twilight hues. "No, James, it's okay. How have you been?" He hesitated, clearing his throat awkwardly. "Better, actually. I've started therapy just like you suggested. It's been eye-opening." Genuine relief filled my chest. "That's good to hear, truly." He paused again, gathering courage. "Emma, I know it's too late for apologies or to fix what broke between us, but I just needed to say this clearly. I understand now how deeply I hurt you. I was selfish, careless, blind. I'm sincerely sorry for everything." His words were honest, vulnerable, carrying genuine regret, something I'd long needed but no longer required to move forward. Yet hearing them now felt healing, an important closure to our story. "Thank you," I replied softly, warmly. "I forgive you, James. Not because it's easy, but because holding on to resentment hurts me more, and we both deserve peace." We spoke briefly, kindly, as two people who had once loved deeply, now respectfully parting ways, granting each other freedom to rebuild separately. As the call ended, I placed my phone down gently, feeling lighter, liberated. Nightfall arrived quietly, stars illuminating the sky in breathtaking brilliance. I wrapped myself in a warm blanket, settling onto the porch swing, gently swaying beneath the canopy of stars. Here, in this stillness, I realized my wounds were finally healing, not because time had passed, but because I had actively chosen self-love, forgiveness, and the difficult path toward genuine happiness. Returning home after the week at the cabin felt symbolic, a fresh beginning, stepping confidently back into a life fully mine. My apartment, once merely a refuge from chaos, had become a sanctuary filled with warmth, laughter, and new dreams. Maya visited often, our bond deepening into a friendship rooted in shared resilience, compassion, and courage. Together, we helped each other embrace healing, reminding one another daily that our past didn't define our worth or our future. One evening, as we sat quietly on my balcony, watching the city lights flicker beneath a velvet sky, Maya turned toward me thoughtfully. "You know," she began gently, eyes sparkling softly, "I used to think we were victims of the past. But now I see something else. We're survivors. And more than that, we're stronger, wiser, better." I squeezed her hand warmly, smiling. "And we're not alone anymore." She smiled back, the silence between us filled with quiet strength and sisterhood, a beautiful, unexpected gift born from pain. As months passed, I continued to grow stronger, more certain of myself and the boundaries I'd carefully built to protect my newfound peace. One morning, as I sat sipping coffee at the kitchen table, Oliver and Ava laughing nearby as they ate breakfast, I suddenly realized my heart felt full. Not because of external validation or anyone else's expectations, but simply because I was authentically myself. My happiness was genuine, built on truths I'd fought hard to embrace. Oliver glanced over, noticing my smile. "Mom, you look happy today," he observed sweetly. I reached out, ruffling his hair affectionately. "I am happy, sweetheart, very much." And in that moment, it was true. Not temporary or forced, but genuine. I'd reclaimed my life, discovered my worth, and set healthy boundaries that protected everything I held dear. Later, as I dropped them off at school, Ava paused, hugging me tightly before running toward her friends. "Love you, Mommy." I watched them both disappear into the school, warmth blossoming inside my chest. My journey had been painful, yet profoundly transformative, guiding me toward a life of strength, resilience, and genuine joy. As I drove away, sunlight streaming gently through the windshield, I felt the quiet power of true empowerment flowing through me. I'd survived heartbreak, deception, betrayal, yet emerged stronger, wiser, whole. My phone vibrated gently beside me. A text from Maya appeared. "Dinner at mine tonight, celebrating our new beginnings." Smiling warmly, I replied without hesitation. Wouldn't miss it for the world. Driving toward my day, my future, I knew now that the darkest moments could indeed lead to the brightest transformations. This wasn't merely a happy ending, it was a new beginning. And for the first time, I was ready for everything it promised.